I've always led by co-creation. I've always led with trust, and I suppose I lead with clarity, giving clarity. And I think those are the three things that I try to lead with as much as possible when I'm leading teams or leading athletes into a training phase, into a major competition, into a major games. They're probably the three things that stick out for me when leading teams.
Welcome to the How They Lead podcast, hosted by Benjamin Wade and Ben Stocker. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the world of high performance, showcasing examples of how individuals and teams can reach their full potential.
Together, they'll be inviting amazing guests who have defined or represented high performance in their own right, from world record breakers to individuals who have achieved first in their fields. The How They Lead podcast will showcase a diverse range of guests, each with their unique stories and insights to share. So join us as we challenge traditional ways of doing things, explore new ideas, methods and possibilities, and evolve the way people perform.
Without further ado, Tom, welcome to our very first, our inaugural, our maiden How They Lead podcast. A very big thank you for joining us today. Basically, we're having conversations with people out there who are making and shaping high-performing teams, and hopefully our viewers and our audience will learn a thing or two along the way. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, guys. The honour of being the first.
You are the first. So, Tom, look, really big welcome from Ben and me. What we want to do with these podcasts is give you an opportunity from the outset to introduce yourself, a bit about your background, what you're working on right now. So over to you.
A little bit of a background. Tom Hodgkinson. My current role is I'm the Head of Paratriathlon for British Triathlon. And before that time, so I started in June 2022. And before that, I spent 13 years with British Triathlon, the Great Britain cycling team, working my way from kit bag and cones guy, go rad coach in the community, all the way to the podium of the Tokyo Paralympic Games, with hopefully familiar names of Neil Fackie, Aileen McGlynn, James Ball, Kadina Cox, Jodie Cundy, Jacko Van Gass in the team sprint. We had a successful games there in Tokyo. And then after that, I moved on to British Triathlon 6 months later. And for the last 9 months, I've been leading that team into the Paris cycle.
Brilliant. Exciting career so far. And I think, from the brief opportunity we've had to do some work with you and the athletes and the coaches and the guides over the last month, I think going into Paris is an exciting cycle for the team. I want to delve into a bit about you and ask you our first question, which is our How They Lead question. So for you, in one sentence, can you describe what your day-to-day approach is to how you lead people?
Well, that's a tricky one. That's a difficult start. And I think it's trying to keep it as simple as possible. And I think when I think about my leadership in the coaching sense and in my current role, I'm probably leading by co-creating. I've always led by co-creation. I've always led with trust, and I suppose I lead with clarity, giving clarity. And I think those are the three things that I try to lead with as much as possible when I'm leading teams or leading athletes into a training phase, into a major competition, into a major games. They're probably the three things that stick out for me when leading teams.
I think there was one phrase in how you lead that resonated with me, and I think the whole of our team from a couple of weeks ago, and that was your picture of an armchair. Can you remind us what that phrase is?
Yeah, so I suppose that what you saw there was me describing how I wanted to be remembered and our team to be remembered in the future. So I always get people to think about the destination. So trying to share some clarity. What's the destination? Where are we going? Is that in 2024 at Paris? Is that in LA 2028? And the part that you remember there, the three parts that I spoke about with the team and how they want the team to remember is that they share the destination, and that we're here to co-create and share that journey as kind of like air traffic control. They're the pilots. We're air traffic control. The middle part was around the performances that we were trying to achieve in Paris and LA, and what we're trying to achieve by developing people and delivering excellence as British Triathlon. And the third part is say it well, say it early, and that's the empty chair. So for people like Amazon, the empty chair can be the customer. So when you're sitting in a meeting or you're sitting in the side of the pool and you're talking about something or someone, it's usually someone that's not present. And it's to make sure that if you're having that conversation, that you say it to the person, and you say it to them as well as you can, as early as you can, and make sure that you have an impact and have good intent with that. Because what I find is it's really easy to have a conversation with someone and feel like you've shared it, but nothing comes of it. And I think that can delay. And in the time constraints like you spoke about with Tokyo and with Paris, we had an extended cycle. So everyone's a little bit tired after Tokyo, and especially with the COVID lockdowns, that's taken its toll on people across business, across sport. And now we've got a shorter cycle going into Paris. So we've had a year extended of being at that high intent, including all the lockdowns, which has not been nice for anyone. And then we've had a shortened games into the next cycle. So that ability for us to reset, readjust, we haven't got that time to think now. It's back into qualification and back into heading towards the games. So I think that's why I say it well, say it early. That's why, we put that empty chair out there and say, is there things that are being left unsaid? Are there things that are being said whilst we're not present that need to be said right now? And that hopefully gets the conversation going.
A lot of what you've just mentioned ties into the three things that you brought up in how you lead. So co-creation, clarity, and trust. Would you say out of those three, one stands out to having the biggest impact out of those three that you mentioned?
I suppose co-creation is me. That's me. That's how I like to lead. I know I've not come from a cycling background. I wasn't on the Olympic or Paralympic podium. I've come from a coaching background, from through the sport, and seen it from that side. And what I realised really early was I needed to co-create with people that had been on the line, on the start line, and hear their thoughts and their expertise. So the thing that stands out for me is co-creation, and within that is an element of trust, is an element of clarity within there as a leader. So I think co-creation is the standout for me.
Perfect, thanks for that. Yeah, and I suppose you get that element of buy-in as well. If you start co-creating, you get the buy-in. The team really want to help you. They want to help win.
I think it's really important because when you're there as a coach, and what I've realised the further I've moved up through the pathway is that more people are looking at you for the answers, and they might wait and they might look for you to tell them what to do. And really, they're the experts, physiologists, nutritionists. And all I'm trying to do is create an environment that says, I'm not the expert. I'm a person that galvanizes a team and brings a plan together. But you need to step in here, and this is the space that we'll co-create. At the end of the day, I'll probably be responsible with the athlete for the performance or what we might do. But ultimately, come and pitch something, come and have an intent, come and have a part of this performance. So I think
takes a lot of courage to do that, though, doesn't it? To show that vulnerability and say, well, actually, I'm not the expert, and open yourself up to that vulnerability piece.
Yeah, and that's been a journey that I've been on throughout my coaching careers. It's embracing that, sharing that pretty early. And every time I've stepped on, it's me being more vulnerable and sharing that even more and being more confident with it as well. And I think when I first stepped into my podium role, I was probably a little bit of imposter syndrome kicking in there, thinking I needed to show that I knew something. I needed to put that kind of philosophy forward when actually I needed to stick to my authentic self, which was just saying, I don't know everything. I need this kind of team around me for this athlete. That's the destination. How do we get there? And it's up to everyone to do that. So it does need a lot of vulnerability. It does need a lot of self-confidence within that as well, and the ability to sit there and go, this is okay. And I think you get the best out of people from that.
Good stuff. And I think for us, like we'd echo that in our experience working with sports teams and businesses. I think for us, there's three elements, I think, that guide our philosophy in terms of working with people. And that's self-leadership. How good is someone at role modeling? Because if you can role model vulnerability, co-creation, trust, then people are gonna reach for that. The teamship bit, about how can you co-create and be a good team player. But then also followership, like you've just described there, handing power over to your subject matter experts or your athletes, and actually following them to the podium when they're in that race period or that game cycle. And we've got a few questions that Ben's gonna ask you now, just to delve into your experience a bit more on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Yeah, definitely. And this is something that I really wanted to hear from you as well, given sort of Ben's background on the pitch and mine from the military, where quite often, if you're seen as a leader, it's assumed that you have to be the biggest, the most confident, the loudest on the pitch or in the battlefield. So actually to hear your experience about actually followership is just as important. And then being a great team player, the teamship is just as important as effective. That's what I really wanted to hear from you as well. So yeah, the first question really was to do with the self-leadership aspect, and to hear if you had any role models, whether that's in your previous career with cycling or with paratriathlon now, who's influenced you and your career so far? Any role models that you can think of?
This kind of links to what I'm doing with my masters at the moment. So I'm currently doing a masters with Harvard University on coaches' journeys, and I'm using Campbell's hero story model through that phase. So it's really interesting that we're talking about role models and mentorship and who it is that starts you on that journey. And I think when I think back to the start of my journey, and everyone goes to this. It's that first sports coach. It's that first PE teacher. And I must admit, I'm going there, and it was Martin Wright for me. And he was the most strictest, probably, PE teacher in the building. And I grew up in South Manchester, and it's tough. It is tough there. You know, some lovely people there. My family's there, but it's tough, you know. But he managed to just maintain that environment so well without ever kind of breaking any boundaries. You just knew straight away what the boundaries were. And he was one of those kind of PE teachers that had kind of taught your parents, who taught their parents. He'd just been there long enough, and everybody knew, and everyone had passed down that knowledge that's, you know, how it rolls in this environment. And it wasn't done in a forceful way. It was just done. You just knew it was an unknown known. And what he created was this ability that this is the boundary. This is the environment in which we're going to work in, and you go and explore. And it's up to you to go and explore it and learn your sport and understand your sport and have an impact on the game. And that's how we led through guided discovery, basically. So I think that's when I link back where I got co-creation from, it came from that.
I like that term, guided discovery. I really like that. I've not heard that before. I like that.
Yeah, so it's like a coaching term of just setting out the playground and setting out the pitch and going, right, okay, these are the constraints and the constraints-led approach. And this is now how you're going to play the game. And you get to learn and discover through that, instead of somebody saying, well, A to B, B to C, put the ball in the net, kind of closed, you know, to open kind of delivery. When I think to kind of trust and clarity, I think to John Norfolk, who's currently the head coach of the Great Britain cycling team, who brought me across into the Paralympic coaching. And his one was always minding the gap. So with mine, it was always about trust and getting close. And his one was about getting close, but minding the gap. And what he was doing there was just creating that space to have those critical conversations, those clarity conversations. And that's something that I really needed to develop when I first came into high performance coaching and leading teams. Is I just wanted to go straight to the friend zone. I just wanted people to like me. I just wanted to be liked as a person and as a leader. And I suppose a little bit of the imposter syndrome there. People like me, then they'll get used to me, and then I'll be able to influence them. And what I learned from John is that you can be respected and liked through respect rather than just being liked. And I think you can get a lot more traction as a leader through being respected first and then being liked, rather than the opposite way around.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think you it's interesting that your primary school teacher, you talked about he had those unknown boundaries, but they were known. And it sounds like he was minding the gap really, really effectively. And I think it's quite interesting when people have that professional distance, because they've gone down the credibility route, build credibility before relationship type element as a coach or a leader. And I think the mistake I certainly made that as a coach early on is to go relationship to then try and get credibility. And I think I agree with you. Like, you get stuck in that friend zone where it's quite hard to then progress and progress that other person's performance, because they view you as a friend rather than someone that can impart some knowledge, wisdom, etc. with them. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there was, I think of an example of an athlete who it got to the end of his progressions and said, time's up, that's it, the contract's not being renewed. And where was the conversation? Where was it? We had all these opportunities, and it's the blind spot of trust, isn't it? They're saying, I'm working really hard, I'm doing what I should be doing, and we're monitoring it and we see that they're doing just as much as they should be doing. It's, but I had a little bit more. And I thought to myself on that day, I was like, that's it. That's minding the gap. That's setting the boundary. That's allowing us to have a critical conversation and sharing some clarity well before this should have happened. And going, we're under a bit of pressure now. And we should have been having this type of conversation back there. And I think I always remember that person, always remember the face. It probably keeps me up at night when I know that I've got to have one of those conversations. They're never easy, are they? They're never easy to have those when you need to. But by co-creating that relationship, by starting with respect and leading from there rather than friendship and building that over time, I think that's the most healthiest way forward.
Yeah, and I think some of the people that hopefully will be listening to this episode will really resonate with that from a business setting. Like there are people who are underperforming in a business environment, and I think you've invested in hiring them, you've invested in training them, and I know a number of CEOs and leaders that I've worked with over the years who have I've gone down one route or the other. Either they've cut too early because they haven't used any empathy or relationship, and I think it's the majority have gone, well, we'll just give them a bit longer. And then all of a sudden it's like, right, we need to have that conversation. And the person's like really shocked. It's like, wow, like, why didn't I get this feedback 3 months ago? It's a tough one.
And everyone's made those mistakes. It's not to say that every high performance coach has come in and gone, right, that's it. I'm going to start at this point and I'm going to lead in this way. It's a journey, isn't it? And you learn from the wins and from the mistakes and the trials and tribulations. But you try as much as you can to lead with that. And that's the best way to be kind, is to be clear. I think that's something that I took from our head of people culture and development in Matt Jefferson. It's kind to be clear and just saying, this is where we are. I really do like you as a person, but there's this thing in this context and this environment, it needs to look like this. This performance needs to look in this way. And it is difficult. It is challenging to have that conversation, because ultimately as a head of Paratriathlon or as a coach of the Great Britain cycling team, I knew my athletes inside out. I probably knew them better than my wife. And she said that often enough. She said, you're having conversations with athletes that even we don't have. And you're building that kind of relationship and the strength of that relationship. And at some point, you also need to remember that we're here for a professional reason as well. And we're on that journey. And it's usually people outside of your coaching relationship or business relationship that's attacking that. So if a competitor goes and does a faster time, right, well, that's reset the boundary. We need to go again. We need to have that ability to push again. And I think that's really hard when you're in that such a connected relationship.
You mentioned building that trust and rapport over some weeks and months. It takes time. How have you found that guided discovery approach that worked so well with you back in the day? How have you found implementing that with team members that may be new to the team or change over quite frequently, where you have to build that trust and rapport to really utilize that guided discovery approach? How have you found that?
Yeah, I must admit, it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one because it's always around context. It's always around funding. It's all around politics, culture. So when you're in a high school setting, there's no funding on the line. There's no. There might be an end of year exam and there might be an Ofsted report, but you just have to be good, don't you? Whereas in a high performance setting, I really struggled in the beginning to be able to use that approach and just kind of let athletes explore, because you're always under a time pressure and you're always under a target or an objective that needs to be met. And I think that the real interesting part was when we got into the final part into the Tokyo cycle, and we had a real crux moment just before the games, and we just changed it all. We went to guided discovery, and what we did was, if I would have said to the athletes, we're going to do 4 rolling kilos, which is 4 kilometer, 1 kilometer efforts, and our race distance is a kilometer. We were going to do 4 in a session. I said to them, we're going to do 4 rolling kilometers. They just go, no, we're not doing that. But what we did was we created a game-based session, which was around co-creating a set of rules, which allowed them to kind of bet against the time. So I'd say, these are the conditions. This is the time I think you're capable of doing today. I'll give you 2 temps per lap, but I'm going to take your disc wheels off you and you have to do it on spoke wheels. Or you can have your aero helmets and you can take 2 temps off. Which one do you want to do? And we'd negotiate on different wheels. And all of a sudden, we're just enjoying ourselves, doing 4 rolling kilos a session, trying to beat the time at each other. And what was on the line was a cup of coffee on the Friday morning. And all of a sudden, we're doing the hard work, reaching the actual training load, but doing it in a guided discovery way. So I think that was...
And in a fun way, it sounds like, as well.
In a fun way. At the Wednesday session, it was like the session that nobody wanted to be in on. It was the hardest session of the week, was the most fun and enjoyable one, and one we started to look forward to. And I think that was the game changer going into Tokyo for that pairing, at least, in that example.
And is that one of the ways that you've kind of shifted the way that you operate as well? Do you think, in terms of how you've developed yourself to be this effective leader, follower, team player, is that one of your operating methods that's changed, do you think?
Yeah, I think that was the turning point of me becoming more comfortable in myself, me becoming that ability to be vulnerable. Go, do you know what? I'm all right with what I know. I'm all right with where I'm at. I'm okay with sharing this. I'm okay with having fun in a high performance environment. And it's hard, we've always got to deliver. We've always got to push. But at the same time, this moment is short, and it doesn't last forever. And it doesn't last forever as a coach. It doesn't last forever as a practitioner and a performance team member or an athlete. Then there needs to be these moments where you go, do you remember that time when? And I think that's the thing that keeps me kind of making sure that, yes, we plan and we get the hard work and the progressions done, and not the final part, but intertwined in that is elements of where we can be fun and be ourselves. But it doesn't come at the consequence of the hard work. So I think that's where I was probably at my best as a coach, and I'm starting to really embrace that as a leader rather than a coach in my current role.
Yeah, I think it's just reflecting. You've got me reflecting now back on like my very bad rugby playing career and a slightly better coaching career. And actually, if I look at kind of total effort exerted when I was playing, the training sessions and the teams I was part of, where the coaches got most out of us as players, were all decision-making based game practices. They were all, here are the levels of the game, figure out, and the parameters, figure out how to beat your oppo, or figure out how to score bonus points. And I think, as long as you are, what I'm hearing from you and resonates in my personal experience as well, is as long as you structure the practice, whether that's in sport or whether that's in business, to achieve the end objectives you want, finding enjoyment, fun, laughter, kind of competition, I think is such a powerful stimulus.
And it can't be at the expense of what the sport looks like or what the end product is. It's the craft and the expertise in being able to manipulate the environment is constraining just the most simplest of things to be able to elicit a bit more brain activity, a bit more engagement, a little bit more thinking, and that ability to adapt in the moment. And I think if you can create that environment more often than not at the expense of the sport, not expensive of hard work, then you've probably got a cracking session. And let's not get away from it. In cycling and in paratriathlon, you just can't get away from the fact that you're on your bike or you're running or you're swimming a lot of time. So you've got to do the hard work, but at the same time, you've got to enjoy it. It's got to be a passion. If it isn't, then it's not a great place to be.
I was going to say, 'cause it must be difficult to introduce elements of competition during the training when the end result is competition as well. So you don't want to overload people with competition everywhere they look.
Yeah, I think it's bringing that enjoyment level and in the majority of the training. So this is the amount of hard work that we can get done. These are the opportunities where we can enjoy it and we can flex a little bit. and we can have a little bit of co-creation. But these moments are where we're really going to be under task. This is the prep session. This is the session where we're going to go through our race protocols. This is the actual race, and it's that drip of threat, isn't it? And if people are constantly having the drip of threat, and competition sometimes can be seen as threat, you know, a little tap on the head, just a little tap. But if you do it long enough, then it becomes a bruise, then it becomes a store, then it becomes a headache, and then it becomes really bad. And it's just constant pain. And that's what threat can be sometimes. So you have to dose that in the right way so that it doesn't turn an environment into the wrong environment. It doesn't become healthy, becomes toxic, you know, that constant drip.
And do you think, taking everything that you've learned to date, would you say that this is one of the most enjoyable teams that you've been a part of, or the best performing team? If you can think back over your career, do you think this is almost the pinnacle in terms of the teams you've operated with?
I think that the balance is right, and it's the two high performing teams. They're both world class teams, are both performing on a really high level at Olympic and Paralympic level, and they're two totally different philosophies of delivery. You know, where I think when I was a coach at the Great Britain cycling team, it was around kind of producing the performances and the medal count and make sure we're number one nation in the world. And I think to the philosophy of British Triathlon at the moment is, you know, developing people and delivering excellence is our performance mission. And that just sounds a little bit different, and it's delivered a little bit different, but the outcome is the same. It's still high performance, it's still medal winning delivery, and people going through that process to be a Paralympic champion. So both teams do it really differently, and it's been nice, having spent 13 years with the Great Britain cycling team, to spend the next, or hopefully the next 13 years with British Triathlon, but the last kind of 9 to 10 months with British Triathlon, understanding that philosophy and protecting that as well.
And which team have you enjoyed to date so far the most, if you had to rank one over the other?
Oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. Yeah, I think I thought
you were going to. I thought you were going to.
Yeah, you did well.
I did want to dodge the first question, but no, both teams are great, and I've had great experiences with both, and I can't speak highly enough of both organisations. So to pick the two, it's not fair. It's not fair, and I'll have great experiences with both.
I thought I'd try.
It was a nice try. It was a nice try. Well played, Tom. Well played.
I like that. One question I did have, which kind of links into a bit more about the teamship as well. And actually, this might be a question that needs a part 2 for this podcast. But we have a lot of clients who there's a bit of a dilemma between whether they give trust straight away or it has to be earned. And you're probably in a prime position to tell us how you operate, whether you give trust to somebody who's joined the team straight away, 100% of the trust, or do they have to earn it? Because actually that's key to forming the team and that sense of teamship. So that really that trust question would be one that I'd like to pose and see how that comes across in terms of your teamship, or how you build that team.
Yeah, trust that's really interesting, isn't it? It's really interesting. I don't know whether I've got an answer for it, because it's a real deep question. It's a real deep question, trust. If you don't start with trust, you're starting with not trusting, is where I'm going to. And if you're not starting with trust, then you're not starting with clarity. And you've probably got to look at if I'm thinking about where I sit right now and the amount of interviews that I've been in, it's the clarity of the interview process. It's the clarity of them showing them at their best, and you showing you at your best. And what we've moved to at British Triathlon, I think in performance, is more of this work-based day session where people come and experience an experience of working in our team. And we try our hardest to limit the presentations, limit the interview questions, and use specific examples in our work environment where people get to explore a live example of what we're dealing with right now. And it gives us an idea of how they might work as a leader within our team. So do I start with trust? I do start with trust. And it's up to people to maintain that and to keep on delivering against that. And it starts you off on a good foot. So I think if you don't start with trust, you start with no trust. and that, I believe, then creates a real big divide. It creates a hierarchy. It creates the environment which I'm not after. So when I welcome somebody into this environment, okay, this is your role. This is what I'd like you to deliver. Start with clarity, and then really start to emphasize that trust and take it to another level of trust when they deliver there. And I think, like you said before, it's that intent when people come in, they can, I'll just get my feet under the table. I'll just wait. I'll just play it easy. And usually we haven't got that kind of time. And that's when I think there's gaps appear. That's when you start getting into that process of managing people. I think if you start with trust and you're really clear, you'll start off on a really good footing, and people will make mistakes. There's no two ways about it. I'm currently probably making mistakes right now, but ultimately that's life. But I think we've got to start with trust. How about you guys? Where do you start, and where do you sit with that question?
Well, I like that. I like that quote, actually. Yeah, if you don't start with trust, you start with no trust. I think that sums it up.
Yeah,
pretty nicely.
I think it's a fantastic topic and question, and it's so rich and hard to wrestle with. And we've been on the side of mountains with SLTs of businesses and asked that exact question. Raise your hands who thinks trust is given and who thinks trust is earned. And you just watch half go like that and half go like that, and you're like, wow. Okay, let's have a conversation about lifting the curtain on that. And I think for me it comes down to, I really like your story there of the interview process, because whenever I've asked someone that question in an exec coaching session or a team session, and they've said, you've got to earn my trust, Ben. I'm like, okay, so the last person you hired, when you offered them a role, what would you call that? And you watch the cogs go, and they're like, crap. Okay, yeah, I gave them my trust. I'm like, great. And when they accepted and they turned up, they've just given you their trust. So now I'll ask you the question again: is it earned or is it given? And I think then I will quite often get it's given until you break it, and then you've got to earn it. And then we get into a whole different conversation that probably isn't for now, but then it's about re-earning and transparency, and how can you build a relationship from a position of broken trust, etc. But
I think that's why I probably come back to co-creation. You've got to agree that you've got to put the constraints of that relationship. Say, these are the boundaries. This is where we're going to work. This is how we're going to work. And always contracting that conversation or that piece of work and saying, this is how I want it to be, or this is what the destination is. Mm-hmm. This is what the outcome is. How do we best get there? And I think that's why I probably say I lead with trust rather than no trust. And
I think just nicely, I think threads back to what you said earlier about credit, mind the gap. Actually, if you set those ways of working, I think is what you're talking about, and do the credibility bit before the relationship gets too close, actually you can understand what the trust is and what trust is given from the outset in terms of how to give feedback, how to receive feedback, and ways of working.
Yeah, because we often get invited into clients who the team is working well, but every time they try and push for that high performance level or try something new, they see the cracks starting to appear. And then when we come in and break it down, it's because the trust wasn't there to begin with, or not enough trust was built and given out right at the start. So actually we have to go all the way back to the beginning, build up that trust and rapport, and then take them back up to that high performing stage. So I think, it is critical, as Ben said, something that we do delve into with many of our clients. It seems to be a common theme that they've either missed out a stage when they were bringing the team together, or they need to go back and revisit how they are giving out that trust.
Absolutely. When you're at the side of that mountain, Ben, there's the difference between hands up and hands down. Is that between the hierarchy of the team, or is that usually just 50-50? It depends who it is.
Yeah, it's an interesting. So that particular example, it was really blended. They had co-CEOs. One CEO, trust is given. Other CEO, trust is earned. Two CEOs turn to each other. Oh, okay. And the beauty of that scenario is Like, we've got them for the next 4 to 5 hours walking in, the beautiful Welsh countryside, then walking alongside them, having conversations. We can pick that apart over dinner, etc., before we even get into a leadership kind of development program. But in that situation, it was a real moment where people just, because also they're not being interviewed, they're not in a training session, they're out in the hills. So you pose a question like that, and they go, "Oh, I'll just give you my answer," and you're like, "Oh, I've shown my true colors." Like, and that's great, because that's what we need. Like, you talked about trust, like transparency builds trust. So even though there's a disagreement there, or a conflict or diversity of thoughts, we can build from that. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I've been on many of those walks over the Hereford, the hills of Hereford, with ex-Royal Marines, and you're into like hour 4 and you're a little bit tired, and the fish and chips is still another hour away. Your mobile phone doesn't work. You just can't get out of that conversation. It's brilliant. I love those leadership walks. They're so good.
So that was how we were trying to see your thoughts on teamship. So we've had a look at the self-leadership, delved into teamship, which from what I can see is all based on trust to get that collaboration. In terms of followership, which was the last of the 3 ships that we wanted to delve into with you, have you got an example of where you've seen great followership, or where you think that you've been or had to be a good follower? I mean, you mentioned being vulnerable and understanding and acknowledging that you might not always be the expert. So in theory, you are then following the experts. But have you got an example that stands out as soon as we mentioned followership that you could share with us?
Yeah, I'm using a lot of my coaching here. Appreciate I've only just been in post in British Triathlon for a short time, so I haven't had those kind of real tangible experiences that I can draw upon. They'll probably come in this season or in the coming seasons. So when I think back to Tokyo, in the lead up to it, we had 3 6-month blocks of training that we could do. The games got stopped. That was it. We're going again. And we had 3 6-month blocks that we could work with. And I turned around to my team and I said, "This is the destination. We've just done a 1 minute, 1 seconds in the last kilo that we've done, which was nearly 2 seconds off what our best was. And it was nowhere close. The riders were not happy. I was not happy with myself. They weren't happy with themselves. And we just brought it together. Like, what is it? What is the destination? Where are we trying to get towards?" When the athletes came up with 58 seconds, let's call it Project 58. And we'll go quicker than we've ever gone before. We'll go quicker than anyone's ever gone before. No one's ever gone sub 59 seconds for a kilometre time trial. And we broke it down. And I said, right, okay, well, if we're going to do something that we've never done before, or nobody else has done before, then we need to really understand it and what it is. So we broke down the psychology of our relationship and where we're at and what we wanted to do, how we wanted to work. We had the psychologist working on that area. We had the physiologist and the data performance team figuring out what it was that was going to break down that performance. And what we realised, it was the first 2 pedal revs, and it was probably 3,500 watts. It was probably 23 watts per kilo. It was probably 700 Newton meters of torque. And you're starting to get that real tangible bits of information, and you piece it all together, and you run it through the modelling system, and it goes, right, that's what it takes to get to that destination. So we set that plan out. We had the physiologist working on torque production, the first 2 pedal revs, getting as strong as it could be. We had the S&C coach working in collaboration and in conjunction, and what we did is we had the both of them working together. So they come in and do the first 2 pedal revs on the track, and then walk straight into the gym and do a gym set. And that was the first time that we'd blended the 2 together. The 2 would work, do an AM track session and a PM gym, or AM gym, depending on the phase, PM track. And what we did was we brought them both together. So we just changed the way, they changed their way of working. Said we could probably do this better. And the psychologist was working with me on our coaching relationships. And it was that fellowship of them breaking it all down and working together, and me just setting the environment and saying, that's okay, keep on going. We're going to make some mistakes and we're going to try and figure it out along the way, but these are the markers that we need to be hitting. And we went from a 101 kilo to a 58.0, which is like 3 seconds quicker, 1.2 seconds quicker than we'd ever gone before. And going back to that original conversation I had at the beginning around co-creating that session with the athletes, 4 rolling kilos is what we found was they started on a bigger gear. They got off quicker than they ever had done, and they didn't drop off because they'd done the endurance work based on that session, and they just floated all the way through, and they just didn't drop off. It just didn't die off. And what you usually find is they go off fast in the kilo, and then they drop off just flatlined. They started fast and just held it. It was an unbelievable scene, and it was on reflection of working, of discussing and debriefing it with the physiologist. So it was the first time that she'd ever just been given the task. And that's the destination, figure it out. You know, I don't want to set the reps. I don't want to set the session. It's your thing. That's for you to do. And she really enjoyed developing that session and being involved with the athletes and getting stuck in. And that was the first real tangible impact on the team. I think that was an example of fellowship for myself as a leader, being led by the physiologist and them leading, and them feeling really proud of their impact on that and their intent on that. The psychologist, again, building that relationship and getting to a point where we're meeting weekly, discussing any little niggles that were going on in our relationships, anything that we weren't clear on, and then getting to the World Championships. It's just all smiles, just all high fives. And I just remember stood in the track centre, and one of the coaches came across and he said, "The French coach is mad at you. He is so mad." And I'm like, I like to be like, "What's going on?" What, you know, he says, he keeps on looking at his stopwatch every time your athletes go around, and he just keeps on shaking his head. And at that point, 2 days out from the racing, the French head coach knew the game was off. He knew the game was done, and the race was over even before the race had got going. And at that point, like, but we've done what we should have done there.
Yeah,
I think that's my experience of fellowship at its best for me, and coaching at its best in my example.
Yeah, I mean that's a great example for us on followership, and I think I've got an honesty check question for you, Tom. When you started that process and you thought, right, well, let's experiment here, let's enable. How are you feeling for the first few sessions before you saw any results from that delegation, that freedom?
Again, I'm probably really clear on this. I'm going through this with my masters at the moment, and the thing that I wrote down is probably my lowest moment. So this is kind of like the death and the rebirth moment of the hero's journey of that model, and that was my lowest point as a coach. Athletes weren't happy. I wasn't happy. They weren't happy with themselves. I wasn't happy with myself. They weren't happy with me. I wasn't happy with them. And we're at our lowest point. It's like something's got to change, you know. And it's those moments where you're like, it's got to change. We're still winning. Don't get me wrong. We're still winning medals. We're still performing to the best in the world, but just weren't performing at our best. And there was a difference there. That we were still world champions, we're still world record holders. But for Kadina, she wasn't a world record holder, actually. She got beat or came second in Milton. And it was just some real challenging conversations that we needed, and real self-discovery. And when you're going along that journey, I suppose the thing, I didn't have any confidence in it. I just knew that we had the data that I had confidence in. So I didn't have any confidence in the plan. I just knew that we had the idea of these are the things that make up good relationships. These are the things that make up a good start. And we just built on 6 weekly training programs. I said, right, from where we started to where we are now, are we any better? And if we weren't any better, had we done more work than we had done in the previous cycle? Because usually you don't usually see it over a 6-week plan. So like, well, if we're either doing more work or we're seeing the fruits of it, brilliant, but we're not going to do less work. We're not going to stop challenging ourselves. And we just went on that process. So there was no clearly defined plan. We didn't map it out over 18 months, 6-month blocks, and this is how it's actually going to work. What I found myself doing probably 2 weeks, 2 weeks before every event, before every hit out every 6 months, is I'd meet up with one of the athletes in Tack Coffee Shop in Manchester. And it'd be the same question. I feel like rubbish. I feel like we're going really slow. And all I'd do is present the data to them and go, that's where we were this time, last time. and this is what happens. You feel like you're down here, but you're up here in 2 weeks' time. We drink a cup of coffee, we go back to the track and have a great session. And I think we took a lot of confidence, which is not my skill set, from the data set, which is really the data analyst, and go, I'm not the logical person. I'm not the person that kind of creates the Excel sheets and the Tableau data set. But I need to see a visual that says we're in a similar place or better or worse, and why. And we took confidence from that. So I think that's where I was at along that journey. It's just a constant roller coaster.
I was just going to say, I think that's really interesting that, you didn't have the finite kind of this A, B, C, D will get us to the end point. But I like the way that you've put those markers in, those review periods. Did you find that those review periods, having those in, gave you confidence to go another couple of reps at a time, to give more control to your subject matter experts?
And I suppose that's where it gave me the freedom to be that leader. So in the beginning, I was probably a little bit too in it in the first phase, and what we said is if we just go just as fast but on a bigger gear, it means that we're stronger in the first section. If we go on a bigger gear and even faster, then we're in the great place. And if we go to Tokyo with what we know as the Great British Cycling Team marginal gains and the kit, if we get this gear off in those types of conditions at the altitude that the track was at, we're probably going to go 58 seconds. And the first session we did, we got the gear off the line and we went at world record pace. And it was like, oh, okay, now we're in the money. Now we're getting there. We're able to get this gear off the line. The work that we've done has showed that we can do that. If we repeated that and a little bit more, we might get a little bit more. But we probably need to work on a different section as well, a different stimulus. We got to the second one, and what we had there was a set of a timing system that allowed us to get real-time information straight away. We weren't relying on lasers, we weren't relying on stopwatches. And we set up an internal trial because it was COVID, all set out, all to the COVID protocols. It was like a race event because we couldn't get 20 races. I remember the athletes taking off on the first paddle ref and they broke the disc wheel and they stripped the hub. They stripped the hub of the aluminium. You're like, right, okay, mechanic comes in and it's good for race prep. So the mechanic comes in, changes it all around, the rider sit down. You're like, right, okay, we go again. They get back up. They do it again. Right. The boss is walking across the track and he's a strong man. He's a strong man. And I thought, oh, here we go. He's going to go mad. We're like 6 months out from the games. This is like games equipment. And it's like, do you want to do it again? I'm like, yeah. It's like, go on then. Did it again. Broke another wheel. And he's like, right, well, we just need new wheels then, don't we? If you're going to get the athletes that strong, we need some equipment because what we found was broken chains, right? We'll get the chain stronger, right? Okay, now the wheel needs to be stronger, the frame needs to be stronger. And all we were doing was just beefing up this equipment, and the riders were taking confidence, going, we're just breaking equipment left, right, and centre because we're that strong right now. So, yeah, so they went off again, and all I remember was a round of applause from the track, from inside the track centre. And I'm like, something's happened. And it was the old head sprint coach was clapping, and he usually never clapped. He was like, oh, okay, something really has gone. He broke the world record in training. And I was like, right, okay, now we're really onto it. And that then just set us off on a path. And that took the team with it as well. And usually what we found in the Great Britain Cycling Team is one person did it, the next person did it, one person does it, the next person does it. Just shows that it can be done. And it just had a ripple effect right the way through the team and through the support team and through the delivery. So I think that was the moment where we gained a lot of confidence. Whether it didn't work and we weren't breaking world records or we weren't breaking equipment, what I would have done, I don't know. But it was working. It worked. So
yeah, it's a great story, and I think it's a really good lesson because like when the chips are down and you're up against it and you feel like your team isn't performing at the right level, it can be very easy. I think we see it in businesses quite often to go like quite introverted. I want to be in control of everything. and not risk following other people. So you sharing that story of there's some bravery there, I think, in terms of, you know, empowering and following your subject matter experts to explore. Like, as you said earlier on, like, you know, guided discovery, you know, here's the plan. This is kind of where I think we want to go to, but you guys have the key to that. There's one final question before we wrap up the conversation that we always want to ask every guest, and you've been our first guest. You get to put your flag in the summit first. So we named our business West Peak for a reason. There are several mountains that have false or second summits. These summits, they look like the peak, the goal, the objective, but when a tired mountaineer reaches them and sees the real peak was obscured from sight by the false peak, they kind of realized, oh my goodness, like I've got so much more to achieve. And then often they kind of get burnt out and turn around. But this second real summit is our West Peak. And it's our goal through the business to develop people past learning the fundamentals to mastering skills in the real world. So my question to you, Tom, is what's your West Peak? What is a moment where you've encountered a false summit, where you thought you knew everything there was to know about a skill or a practice, and then you've gone, wow, I'm now consciously incompetent. How do I learn more?
Probably my current feeling right now. So,
what, right now or paratriathlon?
Probably paratriathlon. Paratriathlon. I think the success that I'd had with the Great British cycling team, with the team that I'd developed over that time and worked with and had great success with, I suppose I thought that was the peak, and I thought I knew it, and I could move into a leadership role and I could share my wisdom, you know, and what I realised when I came in and pretty quickly for the help of Mike Cavendish, he's been a great mentor to me and will continue to be during my time at British Triathlon, is that this place is different, and how it works and how it moves is totally different. And what I knew with the Great Britain cycling team can bring some of its best bits, but just kind of imposing the plan and showing this is how we did it and this is how I want to do it, it's not going to work. And it's a totally different culture and it's a totally different way of doing things. And I think I was quite protected in that bubble. Like I said, it's a strength of working in an organisation for 13 years, but every strength has its blind spots. And I think that's when coming into a different organisation at the age of 36 and starting afresh with a totally new organisation, I think that's been the second peak for me, the actual peak. And when we get to Paris and some of the things that we're putting in place right now with the coaching team and the performance team and working with West Peak to develop our way of working, I think that will be determinant of whether we reach the summit or not in Paris or in LA. And I think only, and this is what I spoke about before, only when we get to Paris will I realise what some of these things we're going through right now set us up to be and to do and to perform at. Mm-hmm. And especially in LA, I think my performance and leadership will really shine through in LA. And some of the things we're putting into place now in the pathway with great pathway manager and coaches in Emma Springham and Becky and Jack and Tom Smith as pathway manager will really bear fruits then. So I think, yeah, I felt like I knew it all. I felt like I was really confident, and you come back with those gifts, don't you, back from a real great experience. You go, I want to share something. And then you realise the things that you can share, it's just a tiny amount of the next thing. So I think that's where I'm at currently with British Triathlon. Not to say that I feel overwhelmed or imposter at this moment. I'm just really relishing that next summit push to Paris and into LA. So hopefully that is a good answer to that really developed question.
I like that. It's good. Yeah, and it's refreshing to see that you're taking the West Peak and that opportunity to look at areas to explore, and by the sounds of it, with breaking those wheels, use it as a real opportunity to really get there for LA and embrace that feeling of the unknown and the opportunities that are out there as you do go on to the final peak and summit the West Peak.
And I think working with you guys, as much as I haven't put it on your LinkedIn just yet, but I will do. I will put a review on there, like I said I would. we just had this moment in time that in the last couple of weeks to be able to share some clarity before we moved on and pushed on to that summit push, which is Paris for the majority of that group and some of them for LA. And the ability to bring you in, for us to be removed from our environment and challenge ourselves with West Peak was really important. And I think we'll probably go into the season now with a lot more clarity, with a lot more structure, and your team has really supported us in developing that. So we'll see the fruits of that, and I'm sure we'll be working together in the postseason on the next set of work together.
Well, kind words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you again.
Thank you.
As always, we're really thankful for the opportunity to work with you and British Paratriathlon, and love working with the group we worked with. And thank you for coming on the How They Lead podcast.
The first How They Lead podcast.
The very first How They Lead podcast. How'd you find it?
It can only get better from here.
Thanks for joining us on the How They Lead podcast.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode and learned something new about the world of high performance.
If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
And don't forget to subscribe to the How They Lead podcast on your favourite platform so you never miss an episode.
Until next time, keep pushing yourself to reach your full potential and evolve the way you perform.
And remember, just because something has always been done a certain way doesn't mean doing it a new way can't work.